It's called Taquito. We also build different products and provide different services in the Tezos ecosystem. We have a public node. We are also working at the moment on a development environment for smart contracts. But today I'm going to talk about Taquito. So I've been building on, just a quick recap of my story on Tezos. I've been building on Tezos for 3 years. I joined the ecosystem when there was absolutely nothing. There was no tutorial, no documentation. Like, it was really hard. Even the wallets were really bad. If anybody remembers TestBridge here, it was a really bad wallet. So yeah, now you're very lucky because there are a lot of resources and a lot of very good tools on Tezos. It's going to be a lot easier for you to build. Today we're going to talk about Taquito. So here this presentation is going to be in 3 parts. So first I'm going to talk about what is Taquito, what it does, and so different aspects of the library. And then we're going to check how to use Taquito and how you can use it in your developing work. So you can use it to read data from the Tezos blockchain. You can also use it to interact with smart contracts. And then I'm going to present different use cases of Taquito. So the first question is, what is Taquito? And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's not a tasty Mexican dish. It's a TypeScript library. So that library is designed to build dApps on the Tezos blockchain. If you're familiar with Ethereum development, you probably use Web3.js, and it's going to be the same kind of library. And it's going to perform the same kind of actions. So one of the first things that you're going to use Taquito for is to read data from the blockchain. So the kind of data that you can read from the blockchain, there are a ton of data. So for example, you can read accounts and contracts balances. You can also read the data in every block that's baked on Tezos. You can also get the code from a contract. You can also get the storage of a contract. This one is pretty useful because in your application you will probably manipulate this storage, or you're going to present it to the users. And you can also use Taquito to get values out of big maps. The second use case of Taquito is to interact with the blockchain. So here it's going to be something more dynamic, where, for example, you can use Taquito to transfer Tez, so from your account to another account. You can also use it to send transactions to contract. So the presentation before by Susan, where she explained how the contract is going to receive those transactions, most of the time those transactions are going to come from Taquito. Because it's the de facto interaction library on Tezos at the moment. So if you're building a front-end in JavaScript, you will use Taquito. And right now, my colleagues are working on a new feature of the Tezos blockchain, which is events from contracts. And of course, you will be able to use Taquito to read those events and do whatever you would like to do with them in the front end. And then the third thing that you can do with Taquito is that Taquito is a very big library, and we have different packages that you can use for different things. And one of them, so for example, with the main package, the Taquito package, you can forge operations, you can sign messages. There are also different packages to do other things, like for example, validate addresses, signatures, different types of values. You can also use Taquito to convert bytes. It's very useful, for example, if you're building NFTs, because a lot of the data in the big map is going to be bytes. So you can use Taquito also to convert those bytes or to read them. And you can also use Taquito to work with Microsoft. So now that we know better what Taquito is, who is Taquito for? There are different types of developers, and the quick answer is that as long as you're using JavaScript, you can use Taquito. But so that's different categories of developers. So most of them are going to be front-end dApp developers. So I talk with a lot of those developers. They're building dApps on Tezos, and they use Taquito for that. So for example, if you use a framework like React or Svelte, Probably not Angular, but yeah, I still put it there. But also, you can also use Taquito with vanilla JavaScript. So we offer a CDN where that you, if you miss the times, when you had an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file for the application, you can also use Taquito for that, and you just have to include the URL to our CDN. The second type of developers are going to be backend developers. So as I said before, as long as you use JavaScript, you can use Taquito, for example, with Node.js. It's not very popular at the moment on Tezos, but there are some teams that have Taquito in the backend. I coded different examples that you can find on GitHub to show you that Taquito also works in the backend. The third type of developers is going to be desktop app developers. So, for example, if you use Electron or Tori, you can also use Taquito. I myself built a little wallet with Tori, just as a demonstration of Taquito. So it's totally possible to use Taquito also in that kind of development environment. And also, I don't know if any of you use another language that compiles to JavaScript, but it's also possible to use Taquito for that. For example, I like Rescript, and I'm working with other people in the ecosystem who use that language. For example, at Nomadic Labs, they have a wallet that's coded in Rescript, and they provide some bindings to be able to use Taquito in Rescript. So it's also possible to integrate Taquito in a different language that ultimately compiles to JavaScript. Okay, so now we're going to see some of the benefits of using Taquito, because maybe you're wondering why I should use Taquito. As soon as you're going to use Taquito, you're going to understand why you should use it. The first one is that it allows you to use a language that you're familiar with, whether it's JavaScript or TypeScript, because it's a TypeScript library, so it's going to integrate very easily in your JavaScript project. The second one is that all the interactions with the blockchain, with the Tezos blockchain, are going to be based on HTTP requests, and if you wanted to write them by hand, it's going to be very complicated because the node is very picky and you have to format them properly, and Taquito is just going to do that under the hood. The only thing you have to do for Taquito is just write some JavaScript, and Taquito is going to do the rest of the work for you. The third one is that after sending a request to the node is going to respond, and that response is also going to be encoded in some very complicated format that you as a front-end developer, you don't want to deal with. So Taquito is going to deal with that for you. So it's going to parse the responses and then provide a nice JavaScript object where you can get all the information that you want. And also, Taquito is going to give you access to the big maps. So for example, if you're building a dApp for an NFT, then you can use Taquito to request the NFTs from a user based on their address. So Taquito is also going to, it's also another HTTP request, and it will be very difficult to parse it by hand, and Taquito is just going to handle that very easily. And on your side as a developer, it's just going to be 2 lines of code to get the value out of a big map. So I think now we all understood that Taquito is amazing, but there are some limitations with it. And most of the limitations of Taquito are actually limitations from the Tezos blockchain. So it's not something that we introduce in the library, but it's something that the Tezos blockchain doesn't allow you to do. So it reflects in Taquito. For example, you don't have access to any historic data. So the only data that are available to Taquito is the data that's in the last block. So if you want to know like the balance of an account like 100 blocks before, you cannot do that with Taquito. You will need an indexer because Taquito doesn't have access to that kind of information because it's not available on the Tezos blockchain at the time when you want to request it. Also, Taquito is smart contract framework agnostic. So what I mean by that is that the only language that's on the Tezos blockchain is Mikkelsen. And I really want to emphasize that because I'm in charge of the Telegram channel for Taquito, where I answer questions from developers. And I get a lot of questions about that, like why my SmartPy doesn't work, or my Lego doesn't work like that. And Taquito doesn't know about that. Taquito is going to know only about Mikkelsen. So that's why, like as John was saying a little bit earlier, Makerson is a more difficult language to know, but you should have a little understanding about how it works, because Taquito is going to interact with Makerson. So Taquito doesn't know the language that you use for to develop your smart contract. The third one is that was also said before, is that the Tezos blockchain doesn't allow you to request all the data, all the entries in the big map. You can only query a value according to its key. So it's also a limitation of Taquito. You won't be able to have access to all the values in a big map. And once again, you will need an indexer for that. But with Taquito, you can easily request like multiple values from a big map. As long as you know the keys, we provide a very simple method to get multiple values out of a big map. Okay, so now after the theoretical part, we're going to see a little bit of some examples of code of how Taquito works. And so the first part is going to be about reading data from the blockchain. And you're going to understand how Taquito makes your life easier as a developer. So just to show you how it works to use Taquito, so it's an NPM library that you can install very easily. And then those 3 lines of code, that are everything you need to start using Taquito. You know? So just import the Tezos toolkit class from the library, and then you need the URL for the RPC you're going to interact with, and then you just create an instance of that Tezos toolkit. And then here in this variable here, you're going to get all the methods, all the properties that you're going to need later to interact with the blockchain or to read data out of it. So here, for example, let's see how we're going to read the balance of an account. So here you have the address of the account. And if you wanted to do that manually, then you would have to forge the HTTP request yourself and then send it to the node and then parse the response from the node. Here with Taquito, you see that it's only 1 line of code. Well, actually it's 2 lines here, but it's just because I formatted like that. But it's 1 line of code, you know. You see like you have a get balance method, you pass the address of the account that you want to know the balance of, and that's it, you know. Taquito is going to return it. As I said previously, it's also possible to get the storage of a smart contract with Taquito. So that's something very useful if you have a contract with different values that you need in your application, and you want, for example, to display them to your users. So first you create something that's called a contract abstraction, and that's just an instance of a class that represents the contract. And then when you have this abstraction here, you have different properties and methods that you can use to get the data that you need. For example, on the contract abstraction, you have a method called storage that's going to fetch the storage for you. And then Taquito is going to format it properly in a JavaScript object, and you get so all the different properties that you have on chain, they're going to have the same name in the JavaScript object. So you know exactly what you're getting. Now, let's see like how to get a value out of a big map. So a big map is a kind of hash table, so you need to know the key in order to get the value. But here, once again, so the big map is going to be in the storage, so you just query the storage, and then on the storage, you see, for example, ledger, that's the name of the big map. So you just need to know the name. Now, on chain, the big maps are referenced by their ID, but they can also have a name. So as long as you know the name, you don't even need to know the ID. And as long as you know the name, there's a get method on it. You pass the key that matches the value that you want to get, and then Taquito is going to return that value. And here, for example, the value is a NAT on chain, so it's going to be a big number returned by Taquito. But imagine that you're querying a key that doesn't exist in the big map. Taquito is going to return undefined. So that's how you know if the key exists or not in the big map. Taquito also provides different methods to get all kinds of data out of the blockchain. So we have a class that's called RPC client that also exists in the Tezos toolkit instance that I showed you earlier. And here you can see, so that's a screenshot from our documentation. you can see all the different methods you can call, if you need like a block hash or block header or the chain ID, like you can query any kind of data that's on chain with Taquito. You don't have to send a request to the node and then parse it, and Taquito is just going to do it for you. Okay, now the second most interesting part of Taquito is to interact with smart contracts, because you will probably have smart contracts on chain, and you want your users to interact with them, like to make money or something. So you want to interact with the smart contracts, and Taquito is also going to help you with that. So here, as I showed previously, you have to create that contract abstraction that's going to, so in the previous example, it was getting data out of the storage, but now we're going to use that contract abstraction to interact with the contract. So here, for example, that's an example of code to connect a wallet. So my colleague Diego is going to show you in the context of a dApp how it works, but that's just like a preview of how you connect a wallet to your dApp. So you see we created the contract abstraction, and then we're going to use Beacon here. So Taquito provides a wrapper for the Beacon SDK that's called Beacon Wallet. Then you pass some options, and then you request permissions. That's in general, when this line is called, it's when you see that pop-up on the Tezos dApp, and you have to select the wallet that you want to use. And then when it's done, you just pass the wallet to the Tezos toolkit to say, hey, from now on, I'm going to interact with that wallet from the dApp. So you see, it's very easy. It's like 15 lines of code, and your wallet is connected at this point. And now we can send a transaction to a smart contract. So using that contract abstraction here, there is a property called methods, and then on that methods property, every entry point of the contract is going to be represented with its own name. So the name that's on chain is also the name that you're going to get here. So no surprise, no formatting. It's exactly the same name. And then we have different methods to interact with the contract according to how complicated or deep nested the type signature of the contract is. And then after that, you just wait for the confirmation from the blockchain, and that's it. You send a transaction to the contract. So you see, it's just like 3 lines of code. And now, so I want to present some use cases of Taquito. So as I said, Taquito is one big library, but we have like different packages in the library, and those packages do different things. So the main package is going to be the one that you use to like get the storage or interact with the blockchain. But we provide also different packages. So for example, in the main package, you have what we call the batch API. So let's say that your users, you have to send multiple operations, but you don't want your users to like click on the wallet to send the operation, wait 30 seconds, click again, wait 30 seconds. It was just boring. So you can batch all the operations together, and you send them as one transaction to the blockchain. And that's what the batch API does. So here you have an example. Once again, you don't have to like know a lot of things. You see, they're just like methods on a JavaScript object, and you just pass the same, like that. You see that contract call here, that's the one that we saw before, and you pass it as an argument to a method. Like you don't have to learn something new. It's just exactly the same thing, but like in a different way. There's also a second method, like if you don't like this one, or if you don't like chaining methods like that, you can also just create an array of operations that are going to be sent. So one of the goals of Taquito is not to impose some kind of framework or some kind of way of thinking your code, but to give you the freedom of using your own preferred way of coding. So if you prefer like having an array with all the operations that you want to send to the blockchain, you can also use it like that. So you see that we have here a transaction, we have an origination operation, delegation. So there are different examples of operations that you can send. Of course, Taquito is also going to help you originate new contracts. So if for whatever reason you want users to originate new contracts from your application, it's also possible with Taquito. And you can imagine that if you had to do that manually, it would be very complicated. But if you use Taquito, it's like one line of code, like this one. With the originate method, you just pass the parameters that you need, and then you just get the address of the contract that you just deployed. So Taquito is going to make it very easy to originate new contracts. Also with Taquito, we have the utils package. So it's a package that contains different methods. The ones that you're going to use the most are probably the ones to validate different type of data on Tezos. So for example, here we're going to validate that an address, a Tezos address, is actually a Tezos address. That can be interesting if your users have to input their address. You want to make sure that they input an address that's a valid Tezos address. And you can also do that for a contract address, or you can also validate that the signature is actually a valid signature on Tezos. We also provide different packages to interact with the different standards of Tezos. So I don't know if you heard about TZIP 12 or TZIP 16. There are different standards for tokens and for metadata on Tezos. And for example, for metadata, if you wanted to do it manually, you would have to query the data from the big map. And most of the time, it's going to be some bytes that you have to parse. Taquito is just going to do that for you. You just have to import different packages and then target the right contract that contains like the metadata or the tokens. And then you don't have to worry about what's happening under the hood. Taquito is going to do that for you. So here that's an example with TZIP 12 and TZIP 16, but of course, you can, if you use TZIP 12 and TZIP 16 in your application, you can also put them together. We provide a compose function to put them together, and then you can use them in your application. Recently, also we provided a sapling package. So sapling is a kind of it's a way on Tezos to have anonymous transactions. So Taquito created a package for that. So just as it was before, it was just importing a few methods, and then you just have to put the right parameters, and you can do different things that sapling allows you to do. Like for example, you can check your balance in the sapling pool, or you can send transactions to a sapling contract. So that different kind of things. And you can do it in the same way that you send transactions to a normal contract. I mean normal contract without sapling. Yeah, and then there are a lot of different things also that you can use Taquito for. The best way is like to check the documentation. The documentation is very good because I wrote like more than half of it. So I know it's good. And yeah, so with Taquito you can do like different things. You can work with tickets that are a very special type of value in the Tezos contract. You can also play with the transaction limits if you need to put more gas, a bigger gas limit, a bigger storage limit. There are also different functions to work with Michelson, like to parse it, to verify that the Michelson is correct. There are a lot of different packages. And I invite you to check the documentation, the GitHub repo. You're going to find a lot of information. And well, if you have questions or if you think that the documentation is not that good, you can contact me on Twitter, on GitHub, or Telegram. We also have a Telegram on Taquito. If you have questions after this hackathon, you can contact us, and we will be very happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much.